I am Julian, and I am 28 years old. Just a few short months ago, I sat at my parents' formal mahogany dining table and listened in absolute silence as my own blood relatives tore my entire life apart for sport. While I was sitting there, actively trying to maintain some basic level of human respect and dignity in a house that always felt like a war zone, my own mother leaned across the expensive dinnerware. She looked me dead in the eye with a level of disgust usually reserved for criminals, and she said, "Stop making the family look bad." They laughed at me in front of 8 people. My parents, my golden child older brother, his arrogant new boyfriend, and even our extended relatives joined in on the joke. I was the ultimate punchline of my own family. But there was one massive, life-altering thing they did not know. The high-level finance company they were all worshipping, the exact multi-billion-dollar firm my brother's boyfriend claimed to represent as a senior executive, was actively trying to buy out my tech startup. I was his boss's boss in the making. And right now, as I tell you this story from the comfort of my own home, they are begging for my forgiveness, drowning in massive debt, and facing a federal lawsuit that will strip them of absolutely everything they value. Before I tell you exactly how I systematically destroyed his fake empire and watched their smug smiles melt into pure, unadulterated panic, hit that like button if you firmly believe in justice and setting hard boundaries with toxic people. And please, do not forget to let me know exactly where you are watching from in the comments section below. I read every single one of them. Now, let's go back to how this absolute nightmare actually started. That Sunday dinner was supposed to be a standard family gathering. But if you grew up in a family like mine, you know there is no such thing as a casual meal. My mother, Evelyn, treats every single family dinner like a high-stakes public relations event for the entire neighborhood. She is the exact kind of woman who cares significantly more about the opinions of the local homeowners association board members than the mental well-being of her own children. The heavy crystal glasses were polished until they gleamed under the chandelier. The expensive linen cloth napkins were folded into intricate, stiff shapes. You could smell the overpriced, slightly overcooked roast beef from the driveway before you even opened the heavy car door. I showed up 10 minutes late on purpose. It was a tiny act of rebellion, a small, quiet way to guard my own peace before walking directly into the lion's den. I pushed open the heavy oak front door of the house I grew up in, stepping onto the pristine hardwood floors that always felt more like a museum than a home. My mother was waiting in the grand foyer. She greeted me with a look of pure, unfiltered disappointment. She slowly checked out my plain button-down shirt and simple khaki chinos like I had just crawled out of a dumpster behind a local Walmart. There was no warm hug. There was no loving welcome. Just a sharp, icy whisper telling me to get into the dining room before the food got cold, and I ruined the entire evening for everyone. I walked into the dining room to find my older brother, Donovan, holding court at the center of the massive table. Donovan is 30 years old, aggressively polished, and currently going through a brutally messy divorce that my parents absolutely refused to acknowledge in public. Sitting directly next to him, with an arm draped heavily over the back of Donovan's chair, was his brand new boyfriend, Preston. Preston looked exactly like the kind of guy who uses words like synergy and alpha energy without a single hint of irony. He had a perfectly manicured beard that looked like it took an hour to trim, a tailored designer suit that screamed new money, and the deeply smug aura of a guy who peaked during his college fraternity days and never quite moved on. From the exact moment I pulled out my heavy wooden chair and sat down, the target was painted squarely on my back. Preston completely dominated the conversation from the first bite of salad. He talked endlessly and loudly about his supposedly massive salary, his aggressive commercial real estate investments, and how he was single-handedly revolutionizing the financial sector in our city. Every single time he paused to take a breath or take a sip of his expensive red wine, my mother would instantly chime in. She practically swooned over his financial success, praising his fierce ambition and relentless drive. My father, Richard, who usually stays completely quiet to avoid my mother's terrifying wrath, nodded along like a desperate bobblehead. He was clearly starving for a taste of that dominant alpha male energy Preston was projecting across the table. Then Preston turned his sharp, predatory attention directly to me. He swirled his wine, leaned forward resting his elbows on the table, looked at me with this sickeningly pitying smirk, and asked what exactly I did for a living these days. I kept my answer incredibly vague. I told him I worked in tech, did some back-end coding, and managed a few small-scale projects. I did not tell him that I built and solely owned DataStream, a highly advanced predictive analytics firm that was currently in the final stages of closing a multimillion-dollar licensing deal with one of the largest equity firms in the country. I kept my mouth entirely shut because I knew my family's deeply ingrained patterns. If I told them the actual truth about my wealth and my position, they would either immediately demand a large cut of it to fund their lifestyle, or they would call me a pathological liar and mock me even harder. Preston laughed. It was a loud, obnoxious, barking laugh that echoed unpleasantly in the large dining room. He told the entire table that coding was a cute little hobby for introverts who could not handle the real world. He aggressively suggested I look into teaching high school computer classes if I ever wanted to secure a stable paycheck and afford a decent car instead of my boring sedan. He stated, as if it were an undeniable fact of the universe, that people who just play on computers all day are simply not cut out for the big table or the brutal realities of the real business world. Everyone at the table chuckled. My brother Donovan actually wiped a fake tear of amusement from his eye, shaking his head at my apparent failure. My dad slapped the solid wood table in enthusiastic agreement. I looked directly at my mother. I waited for her to step in. I waited for her to defend her youngest son, to draw a firm line in the sand, to demand basic respect in her own home. Instead, she just took a long sip of her wine and gave me a harsh warning glare, silently ordering me to sit there and take the abuse. I smiled a very tight, thin smile. I let them talk. I let them build Preston up into a flawless golden god right there in our dining room. I let the burning humiliation wash over me because right at that exact moment, Preston started bragging about a specific predictive analytics firm his company was preparing to aggressively acquire. He confidently named my company. I reached into my pocket and slowly pulled out my phone. I did not say a single word. I just opened my email, found the direct correspondence from his actual CEO, and waited for the perfect, devastating moment to strike. But before I tell you about the sheer panic that took over his face when his perfectly constructed world crumbled, you need to understand exactly why this betrayal cut me so deeply. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. Growing up in our house was exactly like living on a heavily produced, entirely fake movie set. Everything looked absolutely perfect and flawless from the street view. The front lawn was meticulously manicured every single Saturday. The expensive cars were always washed and polished. The annual holiday cards were pristine and staged by a professional photographer hired months in advance. But inside those walls, it was a cold, calculating, and deeply transactional environment where love and affection were entirely conditional. And those conditions always, without fail, favored Donovan. Donovan was the undisputed golden child from the very moment he could walk. He was naturally outgoing, loud, charismatic, and deeply obsessed with appearances just like our mother. He played the right competitive sports, he dated the right people from the wealthiest families in town, and he knew exactly how to perform like a trained seal for my mother's wealthy country club friends. I was the exact opposite. I was quiet, observant, and preferred the reliable company of logic and mathematics over exhausting small talk. I liked building complex things from scratch. I spent my time locked in my room taking apart old computers, rebuilding hardware, and teaching myself how to write complex code. To my mother, my introversion was a massive, unforgivable disappointment. She simply did not understand it, so she deeply resented it. The glaring disparity in how we were treated became painfully obvious when it came time for college. Our grandparents had left a modest inheritance meant to be split evenly into a college fund for both of our educations. Instead, my parents completely drained the entire account to send Donovan to a wildly expensive private out-of-state university. He majored in communications, spent the vast majority of his time partying at fraternity houses, and barely scraped by with a passing grade. When it was finally my turn to discuss college applications 4 years later, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. She didn't even have the basic decency to look deeply apologetic. She casually handed me a stack of cheap community college brochures and coldly stated that they just didn't have the liquid assets to support my education anymore. Donovan's lifestyle had simply cost too much, and they needed to maintain their own standard of living. I did not scream. I did not argue. I accepted the harsh reality that I was entirely on my own in this world. I applied for every single academic scholarship I could find, took out heavy student loans, and worked exhausting night shifts doing tech support to put myself through a top-tier computer science program. I never asked them for a single dime. I graduated with the highest honors in my class. Neither of my parents came to my graduation ceremony. They claimed they were far too busy attending an exclusive summer gala that Donovan was hosting with his new wife's affluent family. I stood entirely alone in the massive university parking lot in my cheap cap and gown, holding a basic diploma frame I had bought myself at a discount store, and I finally realized a hard, undeniable truth. My family would never truly see me. So, I officially stopped trying to make them see me. I put my head down, embraced the absolute silence, and worked. For 4 grueling years, I poured every single ounce of my energy, intellect, and time into building DataStream from the ground up. It was a brutally lonely and exhausting process. I lived in a tiny, drafty apartment, ate cheap instant noodles, and coded until my vision literally blurred and my fingers cramped. But the massive sacrifice paid off immensely. By the time I turned 26, my software architecture was quietly but rapidly being adopted by mid-level financial institutions across the state. I made enough capital to aggressively pay off all my student loans in one lump sum, invest heavily in diversified portfolios, and buy a beautiful, spacious house in a quiet, upscale neighborhood entirely in cash. I had zero debt. I had no mortgage. I had total, absolute financial freedom. But I kept my massive success completely under the radar. I intentionally drove a reliable, unassuming sedan. I wore plain, unbranded clothing. Whenever I visited my parents for mandatory Thanksgiving dinners or stiff holidays, my mother would purposefully hand me printed job applications for retail management positions or entry-level IT roles. She would sigh heavily, shake her head in dramatic disappointment, and tell me that if I just applied myself and learned how to network properly, I could eventually earn a decent salary and be somewhat successful like Donovan. I never once corrected her. I let her fully believe I was struggling financially because it was significantly easier than fighting the inevitable, aggressive demands for money that would surely come if she knew my true net worth. Then, Donovan's perfect, carefully curated life shattered into a million pieces. His marriage fell apart in a spectacularly public and humiliating way. His ex-wife hired a ruthless, high-powered lawyer and took him to the absolute cleaners in the divorce settlement. He lost the luxury house, the expensive leased cars, and his perceived high society status. The brutal custody battle over their golden retriever was vicious and drained whatever funds he had left. He was forced to move back into my parents' guest room, bringing a massive cloud of toxic entitlement and bitter anger with him. My parents bent over backward to coddle him. They blamed the ex-wife entirely for his failures. They dipped heavily into their own retirement savings to throw money at him to fix his mounting problems. And just a few short months later, Preston proudly entered the picture. The very first time Preston came to the house, he made a grand, theatrical entrance. He pulled into my parents' driveway aggressively in a jet-black Porsche. He stepped out wearing a designer suit that looked custom-tailored and carrying a bottle of imported champagne that likely cost more than my first used car. My mother was instantly, hopelessly mesmerized by the display of wealth. She practically rolled out a physical red carpet for him. Preston charmed the absolute life out of her. He talked a massive game about his huge investment portfolio, his incredibly close relationships with Wall Street executives, and his recently acquired promotion at a major firm. I saw right through his ridiculous act immediately. I work heavily on the technical back end of the finance sector. I know exactly how actual generational wealthy people behave. They do not scream about their money to strangers. They do not drop corporate buzzwords every 3 seconds to sound intelligent. Preston was a walking, breathing billboard of deep insecurity and massive overcompensation. But my family ate it up like starving animals. They finally had a brand new, shiny object to brag about to the neighbors and their HOA friends to distract from Donovan's humiliating divorce. The invitation for that fateful Sunday dinner was not a polite request. It was a strict, non-negotiable summons. Evelyn sent a group text message demanding mandatory attendance. She wanted a full family showcase to lock Preston in and secure his place in the family hierarchy. She wanted everything to look flawless. I knew in my gut it was going to be an absolute disaster, but I went anyway. Part of me, some pathetic, lingering inner child, still harbored that fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they would include me this time. That they would ask how I was doing and actually care about the honest answer. I parked my sensible sedan on the street, directly behind Preston's flashy Porsche. I walked through the front door and immediately felt the sickening shift in gravity. The entire house revolved entirely around Preston. And that night, the massive storm that had been quietly brewing for 28 years finally broke. I thought I knew exactly how bad my family could be. I was so incredibly wrong. The dinner conversation felt exactly like sitting through a badly scripted reality television show. Preston held his heavy silver fork like a royal scepter, gesturing wildly as he told clearly fabricated, exaggerated stories about high-stakes corporate warfare. He proudly claimed he was a senior strategist at Harrington Equity, a firm I happen to know very intimately due to my recent business dealings. "The market is absolutely ruthless right now," Preston said arrogantly, leaning back heavily in his chair and unbuttoning his suit jacket as if he owned the house. "But if you know exactly how to leverage the right hidden assets, you can make millions before lunch. It is all about the hustle and the relentless grind. Most regular people just do not have the stomach for it." He looked directly at me when he delivered that last line. His eyes were cold, calculating, and full of unearned superiority. "Take you, for example, Julian," he continued, not missing a single beat. "You are in tech, right? Basic IT support or something similar?" "Software architecture and data analytics," I corrected mildly, keeping my voice perfectly even and my expression blank. Preston scoffed loudly, a harsh sound that cut through the room. "Right? Code monkey. Look man, there is absolutely no shame in it. We need guys in the back room to fix the routers when the Wi-Fi goes down so the real players can do the actual work. But if you ever want to step up to the big leagues, you need to deeply understand real-world economics. I actually know a guy who runs a coding boot camp online. I could get you a discount code if you want to upgrade your skills. Get a real salary. Maybe move out of whatever cramped apartment you are currently renting." Donovan snickered loudly from across the table. "Julian does not care about money or status, Preston. He is an artist. He likes sitting in the dark with his computer screen. He has always been weird like that." I felt my jaw physically tighten. I looked over at my father, desperately hoping for a shred of paternal defense. Just one word to shut this down. Richard was swirling his expensive scotch, a wide, accommodating grin plastered on his face. "Preston is absolutely right, Julian. You cannot hide behind a computer screen forever. It is time you seriously thought about your financial future. You do not have a 401k. You do not own any real estate property. You need to wake up and take detailed notes from guys like Preston." My own father, mocking me directly in front of a total stranger, assuming I had absolutely nothing simply because I chose not to aggressively flaunt it. I had more liquid cash sitting safely in a single index fund than my father had managed to save in his entire working life. I took a slow, deep breath to steady my racing heart. "I am doing just fine, Preston. But I sincerely appreciate the unsolicited career advice from someone who clearly has it all figured out." Preston's eyes narrowed instantly. He did not like being challenged, especially by someone he deemed completely beneath him in the social hierarchy. He aggressively doubled down. He spent the next 20 excruciating minutes absolutely tearing into my character, my quiet lifestyle, and my perceived lack of ambition. He essentially called me a financial bottom feeder. He said lazy guys like me were the exact reason the national economy was stagnant. And through it all, my family laughed. They nodded eagerly. They agreed with every single vicious insult. I pushed my heavy wooden chair back. The legs scraped loudly and harshly against the pristine hardwood floor. The entire table went dead silent. Before I could say a single word, my mother forcefully stood up. She marched over, grabbed my arm, her sharp manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "Julian, help me in the kitchen. Right now." She practically dragged me through the swinging kitchen door. The exact second we were out of earshot from the dining room, her face twisted into a terrifying mask of pure, unfiltered fury. "What in the world is wrong with you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with intense rage. "What is wrong with me?" I fired back, keeping my voice dangerously low. "Your honored guest has been verbally insulting me for half an hour, and you are all sitting there clapping for him like an audience. Preston is incredibly successful." Evelyn snapped fiercely, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "He is exactly what Donovan needs right now after his horrible divorce. He has elite connections. He has vast wealth. He brings actual value to this family name. You are sitting out there sulking and being horribly defensive because you are deeply jealous of him. I will not let you ruin this important night. You will go back out there, you will formally apologize for your rude tone, and you will stop making this family look bad." I stared at her. I looked deeply into the eyes of the woman who birthed me, the woman who was fundamentally supposed to love and protect me unconditionally. I saw absolutely nothing but vanity, desperate social climbing, and cold calculation. She was perfectly, happily willing to feed me directly to the wolves if it meant keeping her shiny new son-in-law happy. Something fragile inside me finally snapped. Not in a loud, explosive way. It was a quiet, cold, and permanent fracture of my very soul. I turned around and walked back into the dining room. I did not apologize. I sat down heavily and picked up my water glass, my face a mask of complete indifference. A few minutes later, the front doorbell rang. It was my cousin Marcus. Marcus was the known family gossip, a guy who always played both sides of every fence to see where he could gain the most advantage. He walked in, grabbed a plate of food, and sat directly next to me. He leaned in close, smelling strongly of cheap cologne. "Hey man, you look incredibly tense," Marcus whispered softly, feigning concern. "Preston giving you a hard time? Do not even worry about him. He seems like a massive jerk. I have got your back, Julian." For one brief, stupid second, I felt a massive wave of relief. I thought I actually had one single ally in the room. I leaned over and muttered quietly, "The guy is a complete fraud, Marcus. I am having a friend look into his professional background. Something is not right with his story." Marcus patted my shoulder reassuringly. "Smart move, bro. Let me know exactly what you find out." 10 minutes later, I excused myself to go to the hallway bathroom. As I walked back, I saw Marcus standing in the shadowed alcove near the main staircase. He was holding his phone, typing furiously with a massive smirk on his face. I stopped walking and watched silently as my mother approached him from the kitchen. "Did he say anything to you?" Evelyn asked urgently in a hushed whisper. Marcus smirked wider. "Yeah, Julian is completely losing his mind. He is so wildly jealous he said he is going to hire someone to investigate Preston's background. He is completely unhinged and desperate, Aunt Evie." My mother sighed heavily, rubbing her temples dramatically. "Typical Julian. Keep a close eye on him, Marcus. Do not let him cause a scene and ruin this dinner." I stood frozen in the shadows, my blood physically turning to ice. The betrayal was absolute and total. My mother, my father, my brother, my cousin. Every single one of them was actively conspiring against me. They were not my family anymore. They were just strangers I happened to share DNA with. I walked back to the table, my face a mask of solid stone. Preston was in the middle of another grand, arrogant speech to his captive audience. "Actually," Preston said loudly, purposefully making sure I was listening as I sat down, "my firm is about to make a massive, game-changing acquisition. It is highly classified, but we are aggressively absorbing a predictive analytics company. a little struggling startup called DataStream. We are going to buy them out completely, gut their entire leadership team, and absorb their tech for our own exclusive use. Those code monkeys will not even know what hit them. They will be begging us for basic server maintenance jobs by next month. I stopped dead in my tracks. DataStream, my company. I sat down slowly, perfectly calm. I pulled out my phone. I opened my secure, encrypted email client. I had 3 unread messages from Mr. Harrington himself, the actual CEO of Preston's firm, practically begging me to quickly agree to the licensing terms I had aggressively dictated just the day before. I looked at Preston. He was grinning wildly, completely soaking in the desperate admiration of my family. He had absolutely no idea he was sitting across the table from the man who owned the very ground he was pretending to walk on. I didn't expose him right then and there. No, that would have been far too easy. I wanted to completely destroy his life. I wanted to burn his fake empire to the ground and make absolutely sure my toxic family watched it turn to ash. I thought I was just going to ruin his career. I was so incredibly wrong about how deep the dark rabbit hole went. The very next morning, I did not go to a traditional office. I walked into my home study, firmly locked the heavy wooden door behind me, and opened my secure laptop. I was not just a standard software architect. I built incredibly complex systems that analyze massive amounts of raw data to find hidden patterns. I knew exactly how to find things people desperately wanted to keep buried. But I needed specialized help for this kind of war. I picked up my phone and immediately called Clara. Clara is my ex-girlfriend, but far more importantly, she is one of the sharpest, most ruthless corporate lawyers I have ever met in my entire life. We broke up very amicably a year ago because we were both dangerously obsessed with our own careers, but we remained fiercely loyal to each other. I also called Felix, a brilliant cybersecurity specialist I had heavily contracted for DataStream's back-end infrastructure. We met at a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop downtown, far away from prying eyes. I laid every single piece of information out on the wooden table. I want absolutely everything you can find on Preston, I told them, handing Clara a slip of paper with his full legal name. He claims he is a senior strategist at Harrington Equity. He drives a brand new Porsche. He wears $50,000 watches. But his story fundamentally does not line up. Felix cracked his knuckles, pulling his heavy laptop from his messenger bag. Give me 24 hours. I will find out what he had for breakfast 3 years ago and exactly who paid for it. Clara carefully looked at the detailed notes I had taken during the dinner. She frowned deeply, her killer lawyer instincts kicking in immediately. Harrington Equity is a legitimate, heavy-hitting financial firm, but they absolutely do not employ flashy show-offs. Harrington himself is old money, very conservative, and hates bad press. If Preston is really running point on the DataStream acquisition, I would have seen his name listed on the preliminary legal dockets. I have not seen it once. They went straight to work. Over the next 3 days, my home study turned into a literal war room. Felix aggressively dug through public records, deleted social media archives, and obscure property registries. Clara pulled deep corporate filings and cross-referenced them with Harrington Equity's public and private employee rosters. What we found was absolutely breathtaking in its sheer audacity and staggering stupidity. First, the fancy Porsche. It was a long-term rental, leased under a fake shell LLC that was registered to a P.O. box in a strip mall. The designer suits, rented from a high-end online subscription service. The expensive watches, extremely high-quality knockoffs imported from overseas. But that was not even the worst part. Clara successfully pulled the official employee records for Harrington Equity. Preston was absolutely not a senior strategist. He was not anywhere near the executive track. He was a mid-level, high-turnover sales broker. His sole job was to cold call high-net-worth individuals from a cubicle and aggressively pitch them standard, boring portfolio management packages. He had absolutely zero involvement in the DataStream acquisition. He had likely just heard whispers about it in the corporate break room and decided to use the confidential information to sound incredibly important at my family's dinner table. It gets significantly worse, Julian, Felix said grimly over a secure. Encrypted video call on Thursday night. Look at this. He shared his screen, pulling up a complex web of offshore bank routing numbers and a heavily encrypted website forum that took him hours to crack. Preston is not just faking his wealth, Felix explained, tracing a digital red line connecting the various bank accounts. He is running a massive illegal side hustle, and it is dirty as hell. He is working with a guy named Victor. They are running a textbook Ponzi scheme specifically targeting vulnerable retirees in wealthy gated communities. They aggressively promise guaranteed high-yield returns on fake crypto and commercial real estate ventures. They take the new investors' money to pay off the early ones and pocket the rest to fund Preston's fake millionaire lifestyle. It is massive, federal-level fraud. I stared blankly at the glowing screen, my stomach physically turning over. My brother was planning to marry this incredibly dangerous man. My parents were eagerly preparing to introduce him to their entire social circle, their country club friends, their church group. Preston was absolutely going to use my family's established network to find his next wealthy victims. He was going to drain their retirement funds. Do we have enough hard evidence for the authorities? I asked Clara, my voice completely cold and devoid of emotion. She smiled. It was a cold, predatory, terrifying smile. I have already drafted the comprehensive whistleblower complaint. We have the exact routing numbers, the IP addresses, the fake pitch decks, and a clear paper trail of the stolen money. I am sending it directly to my personal contacts at the SEC and the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We are preparing a massive lawsuit. But Julian, you need to understand something clearly. When this drops, it is going to be absolutely nuclear. Your family will be deeply caught in the public blast radius. They made their choice, I said. My voice was perfectly steady. I did not feel any sadness anymore. I just felt a cold, hard, unyielding clarity. 2 days later, an ornate, ridiculously expensive gold-foiled envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was a formal invitation to Donovan and Preston's wedding, which had been mysteriously fast-tracked and was scheduled to take place in exactly 3 weeks at a luxury country club. Attached to the expensive cardstock was a passive-aggressive sticky note in my mother's looping handwriting. We expect you to be on your absolute best behavior. Wear a proper suit. Do not embarrass us. I took out a heavy black pen. I forcefully checked the box that said, joyfully accepts. I added Clara's name as my +1. I walked to the street corner and dropped it in the mail. I spent the next 3 weeks meticulously preparing for war. I finalized the highly lucrative licensing deal for DataStream directly with Mr. Harrington. During our final celebratory Zoom call, I casually mentioned that my older brother was getting married and that one of his own employees, a man named Preston, was the groom. Mr. Harrington looked deeply surprised. He said he barely knew Preston, but as a professional courtesy to me, the man who currently held the keys to the advanced technology his firm desperately needed, he would personally attend the wedding reception. The pieces were perfectly in place. The trap was meticulously set. My family wanted a grand show. They wanted a flawless public performance to prove to the world how elite and untouchable they were. I was going to give them the greatest, most devastating show of their entire lives. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. The day of the wedding arrived with the kind of aggressively perfect, unseasonably warm weather that my mother, Evelyn, probably believed she had personally orchestrated through sheer force of will and endless complaining to the event staff. The venue they had chosen was a wildly expensive, hyper-exclusive country club located about an hour outside the city limits. It was the exact kind of place that required a massive initiation fee, a strict dress code just to walk past the wrought iron front gates, and a bank account that most people could only dream of. The sprawling green lawns were perfectly manicured to the millimeter. The massive white event tents were erected with absolute military precision, and the air smelled heavily of imported orchids and desperate social climbing. I pulled up to the valet stand in my standard, unassuming sedan. Clara was sitting next to me in the passenger seat, looking absolutely breathtaking and completely lethal. She wore a tailored, deep emerald green gown that looked completely effortless but cost more than most people's monthly salary. She had her leather legal briefcase tucked securely into the trunk, containing hard physical copies of the whistleblower complaint, the offshore banking routing numbers, and the undeniable proof of massive federal fraud. We were not there to celebrate a union of love. We were there to perform a heavily calculated, precise surgical strike on a deeply toxic illusion that had plagued my entire existence. As we walked slowly up the sweeping stone staircase toward the main reception area, the sheer scale of the financial irresponsibility on display was genuinely staggering. Considering my older brother Donovan had just recently gone through a notoriously brutal divorce that completely wiped out his savings, destroyed his real estate investments, and resulted in a vicious custody battle over his pets, the level of opulence here was sickening. There were massive, towering ice sculptures, a live classical string quartet playing flawlessly near a cascading champagne fountain, and tables overflowing with expensive imported caviar and artisan cheeses. My parents had clearly liquidated a significant portion of their retirement funds, drained what was left of any family inheritance, and possibly taken out a massive second mortgage on their primary real estate property just to fund this one-day spectacle. They were entirely willing to completely bankrupt their own future just to unequivocally prove to their snobby country club friends that Donovan was still a massive winner in the game of life. We checked in at the front desk located in the grand lobby. A highly stressed wedding planner named Gemma was rushing around with a heavy clipboard, barking rapid-fire orders at the catering staff. She looked completely exhausted, her hair slightly messy from running around since dawn. When I gave her my legal name, she visibly tensed up, her eyes widening slightly as she checked her heavily highlighted seating chart. My mother had actually seated me at a small, drafty table in the absolute far back corner of the massive ballroom, positioned right next to the loud swinging kitchen doors and the public restrooms. I was seated entirely with distant, elderly cousins and a few older neighbors that absolutely no one else wanted to talk to. It was a classic, deeply petty power move heavily designed to completely minimize my physical presence and remind me of my lowly place in the family hierarchy. I just smiled at Gemma, slipped her a crisp $100 bill for her obvious stress and hard work, and calmly told her the table location was perfectly fine with me. Before we could even make it to our assigned seats in the back, my mother aggressively intercepted us. Evelyn was wearing a lavish, overly beaded mother-of-the-groom dress that aggressively caught the sunlight in blinding flashes. She looked me up and down slowly, her critical eyes scanning for any tiny flaw she could aggressively point out and criticize. Finding absolutely none in my impeccably tailored charcoal suit, her sharp, judgmental gaze snapped directly to Clara. "Julian," Evelyn said loudly, her voice dripping with fake, sugary sweetness specifically designed for the wealthy guests standing nearby. "I am so incredibly surprised you actually decided to show up today, and you brought a guest. I sincerely hope you completely understand that this is a very high-class, dignified event. We absolutely cannot afford any of your usual sullen behavior, awkward outbursts, or jealousy today. Donovan has been through a terrible divorce. His lawyer bills were astronomical, and he deeply deserves a perfect day. Do not ruin this incredibly expensive event for him." Clara smiled gracefully, extending her hand with the poise of a seasoned litigator. "Mrs. Evelyn, it is truly wonderful to see you again. Your dress is incredibly loud. It certainly makes a massive, undeniable statement." My mother's heavily Botoxed face twitched violently at the veiled insult, but she was far too obsessed with maintaining her flawless public image to start a screaming match in the main lobby. She gave Clara a tight, completely fake smile and quickly turned her harsh attention back to me. "Just sit quietly at your assigned table in the back, Julian. Preston's senior colleagues from the equity firm are here today, and they are extremely important people with massive portfolios. Do not bother them with your boring tech talk or ask them for a job. They handle real wealth and massive corporate structures." She practically floated away to eagerly greet a local politician who had just walked through the doors. I watched her go, feeling a profound, heavy sense of absolute pity. She had absolutely no idea she was currently standing on the polished deck of a rapidly sinking ship. A few minutes later, Donovan and Preston made their grand, theatrical entrance into the crowded cocktail hour. Donovan looked deeply arrogant, soaking up the attention and the flashing cameras like a desperate sponge. Preston was entirely in his element. He was aggressively working the room, shaking hands firmly, slapping backs, and loudly dropping corporate buzzwords to absolutely anyone who would listen. He was actively pitching his fake commercial real estate investments to my older aunts and uncles, laying the sinister groundwork to steal their hard-earned retirement funds and life savings. Preston finally spotted me standing quietly near the open bar with Clara. He marched directly over, a massive, incredibly smug grin plastered across his face. He held a heavy crystal glass of expensive bourbon in one hand and adjusted his fake designer watch with the other. "Julian, you actually made it out of your dark little basement," Preston said loudly, intentionally raising his voice to draw the attention of the surrounding wealthy guests. "I am genuinely surprised you could actually afford a suit that nice on a basic IT support salary. Did you have to dip heavily into your emergency savings for that? Or did you take out a high-interest loan?" I took a slow, calm sip of my sparkling water. "I managed to scrape the meager funds together, Preston. It is a very big, important day. I absolutely would not miss this incredibly revealing event for the world." Preston chuckled, a deeply arrogant, grating sound. "Well, enjoy the free gourmet food, man. Listen, I actually talked to a buddy of mine in human resources at my firm. They might have a low-level data entry position opening up next quarter. The base salary is pretty basic, but it comes with decent health insurance and a small college fund matching program. If you ask me nicely, I might put in a good word for you. Everyone needs a desperate handout sometimes." "I am completely satisfied with my current position and my salary," I replied, my voice completely deadpan and entirely devoid of emotion. "But I do find your generous offer incredibly fascinating. Tell me, Preston, how exactly are things going at Harrington Equity? Are the massive corporate acquisitions and high-stakes buyouts moving along smoothly?" Preston puffed out his chest proudly, completely taking the bait without a second thought. "Oh, absolutely. The multimillion-dollar deals I am currently structuring are completely revolutionizing the financial market. In fact, that little tech startup I mentioned at your parents' dinner, DataStream, we are essentially finalizing the hostile takeover right now as we speak. I have the CEO of that pathetic little company practically eating right out of the palm of my hand. The poor, stupid guy doesn't even know his entire life's work is about to be entirely liquidated." Clara took a slow, elegant sip of her champagne to completely hide her massive, knowing smirk. I simply nodded slowly, looking him dead in the eye. "That is a truly remarkable story, Preston. Truly incredible business strategy." Right at that exact moment, the heavy mahogany doors of the main ballroom opened, and a highly distinguished older gentleman walked in. He was wearing a classic, impeccably tailored suit that did not need flashy designer labels to scream extreme generational wealth. It was Mr. Arthur Harrington, the actual CEO and billionaire founder of Harrington Equity. He walked with quiet, undeniable authority, completely ignoring the flashy ice sculptures and immediately scanning the crowded room. Preston did not even notice him enter. Preston was entirely too busy admiring his own reflection in the mirrored bar and bragging about his fake accomplishments. But I noticed him immediately. I gave Mr. Harrington a brief, highly respectful nod from across the crowded room. He saw me, offered a small, knowing smile in return, and quietly made his way to his reserved VIP table at the very front of the room, sitting next to a local judge. The trap was completely, perfectly set. The doors were figuratively locked. The wealthy audience was seated. It was finally time to burn this deeply toxic illusion to the absolute ground and expose the rot beneath the surface. The grand reception dinner officially began with a level of unbearable pretension that only my wildly dysfunctional family could achieve. The massive ballroom was dimly lit with romantic, expensive amber-colored uplighting. The elaborate multi-course meal featured things like truffled asparagus, perfectly seared Wagyu beef, and gold leaf garnished desserts. Every single tiny detail was meticulously designed and heavily funded to project an image of undeniable superiority and flawless financial success. From my distant, isolated seat near the loud, constantly swinging kitchen doors, I quietly observed the main head table. My mother was absolutely glowing, completely drunk on the perceived social status this lavish wedding brought her. She continuously leaned over to excitedly whisper to her wealthy country club friends, undoubtedly bragging endlessly about her new son-in-law's massive corporate salary, his elite connections, and his sprawling real estate portfolio. My father sat there looking completely complacent, happy to just quietly ride the coattails of Preston's fake financial empire and drink the top-shelf liquor. When the expensive dessert plates were finally cleared away by the rushing waitstaff, the annoying clinking of heavy crystal glasses signaled the beginning of the formal speeches. The best man gave a highly generic, incredibly boring speech about college memories. My mother then took the microphone and gave a tearful, entirely performative toast about the enduring power of true love, the immense importance of keeping family wealth secure, and how blessed they were to welcome such a high-caliber man into their lineage. And then Preston stood up. He confidently grabbed the microphone, adjusting his expensive rented suit jacket, and looked out over the massive crowd of 200 wealthy guests. He delivered a speech that was significantly less about his undying love for Donovan and vastly more about his own massive, fragile ego. He proudly talked at length about his supposed high-level career, his aggressive financial strategies, and how he was fundamentally a natural-born winner who always secured the absolute best assets in life, including his new husband. In my intense line of work, in high-stakes equity and massive corporate acquisitions, you have to be completely ruthless, Preston boldly declared into the microphone, his voice echoing loudly and arrogantly through the ballroom speakers. You have to know exactly how to spot the weak players and ruthlessly eliminate them. Just this week, I personally secured the final legal framework for a massive buyout of a tech company. I will not name them publicly yet due to strict NDA laws, but let's just say their technical leadership was completely out of their depth. They thought they had leverage. I proved them entirely wrong. That is exactly what I do. I win. And marrying Donovan is the ultimate win. The crowd offered a polite, somewhat confused round of applause. Bragging aggressively about corporate takeovers and crushing competitors at a wedding was incredibly tacky, but my family happily clapped the loudest, completely blinded by their greed. As the scattered applause slowly died down, I stood up from my chair at the very back of the room. I calmly buttoned my suit jacket. I picked up my phone and a small, highly secure encrypted USB drive. I began walking slowly, purposefully, and deliberately down the long center aisle, heading directly toward the brightly lit main stage. The entire ballroom went completely, deafeningly silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch my unscripted approach. My mother's face instantly dropped into a terrifying mask of pure, absolute panic. She aggressively hissed my name from the head table, gesturing wildly and frantically for me to sit back down before I ruined her perfect night. I completely ignored her desperate commands. I walked up the small set of stairs, approached the podium, and gently tapped the microphone. "Excuse me. I would like to say a few brief words. I promise everyone here that it will be incredibly educational." Preston looked deeply confused but desperately tried to maintain his smug, alpha male composure. He stepped back slightly, crossing his arms over his chest. "Keep it short, Julian. We have a strict timeline to keep for the photographer." I completely ignored his existence. I pulled out a small adapter cable, connected my phone directly to the venue's massive digital projector system that was previously used for a cheesy, sentimental photo slideshow, and mirrored my secure screen. A massive, high-definition display brightly lit up the entire wall directly behind the head table. My brother Preston just spoke extensively and passionately about honesty, financial leverage, and corporate acquisitions. I said into the microphone, my voice perfectly calm, completely cold, and echoing effortlessly through the massive room. He spoke heavily about his senior executive role at Harrington Equity. He spoke highly about his vast wealth. I think it is incredibly important that we build this new family dynamic on a solid foundation of absolute transparency and truth. I tapped my screen. The first legal document flashed massively on the wall for everyone to see. It was the official Harrington Equity Corporate Directory and Internal Payroll Manifest that Clara had legally acquired through a discovery loophole. This is the internal employment roster for Harrington Equity, I stated clearly, projecting my voice to the very back of the room. I used a digital laser pointer on my phone app to highlight Preston's legal name in bright red. Preston is absolutely not a senior corporate strategist. He is not a director of acquisitions. He is a Tier 2 mid-level cold call sales broker. His base salary is exactly $65,000 a year before taxes. He has absolutely zero legal authority to negotiate any corporate acquisitions whatsoever. A loud, collective gasp rippled violently through the massive ballroom. My mother physically grabbed the sharp edge of the heavy table, her face rapidly draining of all color until she looked like an absolute ghost. Donovan stared at the massive screen in absolute, stunned confusion, his jaw slightly open. Preston lunged forward aggressively, his face flushing a dark, furious, terrifying red. "Turn that off right now. This is a massive, illegal breach of privacy. He is completely lying. Turn it off, you jealous freak." I simply took one step back, keeping the microphone firmly in my hand. "I am absolutely not finished, Preston." I swiped the screen. A new, far more damning legal document appeared. It was a complex, detailed flowchart showing multiple offshore routing numbers, heavily encrypted bank transactions, and fake commercial real estate portfolios tied directly to his name. The luxury Porsche sitting in the valet lot right now is a long-term rental tied to a fake shell corporation registered in another state. I continued ruthlessly, my voice cutting through the rapidly rising panic in the room like a surgical scalpel. The expensive designer suits are rented, but far more importantly, the funds Preston uses to maintain this massive illusion of wealth are entirely stolen. Over the past 2 years, Preston and his associate Victor have been running a highly aggressive, deeply illegal Ponzi scheme. They have been systematically targeting the retirement funds, pension plans, and college funds of vulnerable senior citizens, promising massive returns on completely fake real estate investments. The silence in the room was no longer just confused. It was heavy, suffocating, and deeply terrifying. Several of my older relatives, the exact wealthy people Preston had been aggressively pitching to during the cocktail hour, began to shift nervously in their seats, looking at each other in sheer, unadulterated horror. "You little punk!" Preston screamed loudly, completely losing his polished facade. His hands were shaking violently, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "You have absolutely no solid proof of anything. You are just a pathetic, jealous, low-level code monkey who is deeply obsessed with ruining my life because you are completely broke and lonely." I smiled. It was the absolute coldest, most satisfying smile I have ever physically produced in my entire 28 years of existence. "Actually, Preston," I said, leaning directly into the microphone so every single syllable was perfectly amplified and inescapable, "I am not a low-level code monkey. Remember that specific tech startup you just loudly bragged about acquiring? The one you claimed you were completely liquidating and firing the leadership of? The company is called DataStream." I swiped the screen one final, devastating time. It displayed the official, highly confidential licensing contract, complete with federal corporate seals, digital signatures, and massive financial figures. "I am the sole founder, the chief architect, and the 100% legal owner of DataStream," I declared, my voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable authority. "And I can publicly assure everyone in this room that Harrington Equity is absolutely not planning a hostile takeover. In fact, yesterday morning, I legally dictated the final terms of a highly lucrative, multi-million-dollar software licensing deal with them." Preston froze entirely. He looked exactly like a deer caught in the blinding headlights of a massive freight train. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked desperately out into the crowded audience, searching for an escape that did not exist. From the front VIP table, Mr. Arthur Harrington slowly and deliberately stood up. He casually buttoned his classic suit jacket, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and looked directly at Preston with a gaze that could easily freeze boiling water. "I can completely confirm Mr. Julian's statement," Mr. Harrington said clearly, his deep, highly authoritative voice carrying effortlessly without the need for a microphone. "Julian is the sole legal owner of DataStream. Furthermore, Preston, effective immediately as of this exact second, your employment at my firm is permanently terminated. My internal legal team is actively cooperating with the federal authorities regarding your outside fraudulent activities. Do not ever step foot near my corporate building again, or you will be arrested for trespassing." The absolute main twist had been flawlessly delivered. The massive truth bomb had officially detonated. I stood quietly on the brightly lit stage and simply watched the beautiful, chaotic fallout as Preston's entire fake existence completely vaporized in real time. The immediate fallout following my presentation was a scene of absolute, unprecedented chaos that I will remember clearly for the rest of my life. The carefully constructed, wildly expensive facade of my family's perfect public image shattered into a million jagged pieces directly in front of 200 wealthy, judgmental guests. The sheer panic and raw humiliation in the massive ballroom were incredibly palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Preston completely broke down right on the stage. The confident, arrogant alpha male facade completely melted away in seconds, leaving behind a desperately cornered, pathetic rat. He physically stumbled backward, tripping over his own rented dress shoes and knocking over a massive crystal floral arrangement. It crashed heavily onto the polished wooden floor, sending water, shattered glass, and expensive orchids splashing violently across the stage. "Arthur, Mr. Harrington, please, sir. You have to listen to me," Preston aggressively begged, his voice cracking hysterically as he desperately tried to close the physical distance between the stage and the VIP table. "This is a massive misunderstanding. Julian is manipulating the raw data to ruin me. I was just trying to secure independent real estate investments for the firm's portfolio to increase our quarterly revenue." Mr. Harrington didn't even flinch at the pathetic display. He simply raised one hand, completely silencing the desperate begging. "Save your desperate, pathetic lies for the federal investigators, Preston. Clara, my trusted legal counsel, has already provided me with the comprehensive whistleblower documents. Your massive fraud is completely undeniable. You are completely finished in this financial industry. You will be lucky if you don't spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Mr. Harrington then turned his attention to me, gave a firm, highly respectful nod of absolute validation, and calmly walked out of the massive ballroom, leaving Preston hyperventilating and weeping near the stage stairs. Donovan was currently sitting frozen at the main head table, completely locked in a state of deep, agonizing shock. His meticulously styled hair was slightly out of place, and tears were freely streaming down his face, completely ruining his expensive spray tan and designer outfit. He looked back and forth from Preston's weeping form to the massive digital screen still projecting the undeniable evidence of federal fraud. Finally, he looked directly at me. The horrifying realization that he had aggressively mocked the only genuinely successful person in his family, and was now legally tied through marriage documents to a massive, debt-ridden criminal, was slowly crushing the very breath out of him. But the absolute most satisfying, revealing reaction came directly from my mother, Evelyn. Evelyn slowly stood up from her ornate chair. Her heavily manicured hands were violently shaking. She reached out to grab her expensive crystal wine glass, perhaps needing a drink to steady her nerves. But her fingers were trembling so aggressively that she completely missed the stem. The heavy glass tipped over, spilling dark red wine all over the pristine white linen tablecloth and onto her expensive beaded gown. The dark stain spread rapidly, looking exactly like fresh blood on a white canvas. "Julian," my mother gasped loudly, her voice a desperate, high-pitched wheeze that echoed the destruction of her social standing. "Julian, what in the world have you done? You have completely destroyed this entire family. You have completely humiliated us in front of the entire country club and all of our friends. How could you possibly be so incredibly selfish and horribly cruel to do this today? I calmly unplugged my phone from the venue's projector cable. The massive screen went completely dark, leaving only the amber ambient lighting in the quiet room. I walked slowly down the short stairs and stood directly in front of the head table. I looked down at the woman who had spent 28 years systematically making me feel completely worthless, invisible, and small. I did not feel any anger anymore. I did not feel sadness. I just felt a deep, profound sense of absolute emptiness regarding her entire existence. "I did not destroy this family, Mother," I said, my voice completely steady, completely cold, and entirely devoid of any familial warmth. "I simply turned on the lights to show you the cockroaches. You are the one who aggressively demanded perfection. You are the one who cared significantly more about the superficial opinions of these wealthy strangers than you ever cared about your own son's actual reality. You completely allowed that disgusting fraud to sit in our childhood dining room and aggressively humiliate me, all because he drove a rented car and wore a fake designer watch. You chose an illusion over your own blood." My father, Richard, finally found a tiny shred of cowardly courage. He stood up, puffing his chest out weakly, trying to assert dominance he never actually possessed. "Now you listen here, Julian. You do not ever speak to your mother that way. We can handle this situation privately. You clearly have a lot of money now. You need to use your wealth to hire a massive legal team to fix this mess immediately and quietly before the local press gets a hold of it." I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, entirely humorless sound that startled him. "Fix it? I am the one who fully reported him to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Dad. Clara specifically drafted the comprehensive federal lawsuit that is currently sitting on a federal prosecutor's desk as we speak. I am not your quiet, obedient little bank account. I am not going to pay for a lawyer to save your reputation. I am not the invisible punching bag anymore." I turned my back on them completely. I did not wait for another pathetic excuse, a desperate plea for financial help, or an insincere apology. I walked directly down the center aisle of the stunned ballroom. The massive crowd of wealthy guests physically parted for me like the Red Sea, staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. Clara was waiting patiently near the main exit doors, her leather briefcase firmly in hand, a massive, incredibly proud smile on her beautiful face. We pushed through the heavy wooden double doors and walked out into the cool, crisp night air. The valet, sensing the tension, brought my unassuming sedan around immediately. As I climbed into the driver's seat and firmly shut the heavy door, I looked at the massive country club one last time. The physical building was still beautiful, but I knew exactly how rotten the foundation truly was. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the wreckage behind. For the very first time in my entire 28 years on this earth, I finally felt completely, utterly, and undeniably free. 6 months later, my life was completely unrecognizable in the absolute best way possible. I officially closed the massive licensing deal for DataStream. The influx of highly liquid capital was genuinely staggering, more money than I could spend in a lifetime, but it did not fundamentally change who I was at my core. I still lived quietly, I still heavily valued logic and peace, and I still preferred the absolute comfort of my own company over fake social gatherings. However, the heavy, toxic external noise that had plagued my entire life was completely gone. The national news eventually picked up the massive story regarding the fraud. Preston and his shady associate Victor were officially arrested by federal agents on multiple felony charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and running a massive Ponzi scheme. Because Donovan had unfortunately, and very stupidly, legally signed several joint financial documents during their brief, disastrous marriage, he was heavily investigated by the FBI. He nearly lost what little money he had left paying for expensive defense attorneys to avoid federal prison. The marriage was officially annulled due to fraud, but the massive social humiliation was entirely permanent. My parents were completely ostracized from their beloved country club, their fake reputation permanently destroyed in the community. I maintained absolute, strict zero contact with all of them. I changed my personal phone number, updated my home security systems, and instructed my private legal team to aggressively block any physical mail or communication coming from their specific zip code. I thought I had completely closed the final, painful chapter on that toxic family history. But then, I received an unexpected, highly emotional phone call from my Aunt Sylvia. She was my mother's older sister, a deeply traditional woman who usually stayed entirely out of family drama. She tearfully begged me to meet her for a quiet cup of coffee at a small diner just outside the city limits. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go simply for closure. Aunt Sylvia looked physically exhausted, having aged 10 years in 6 months. She nervously stirred her black coffee, refusing to make direct eye contact with me for a long time. Finally, she took a deep, shaky breath and delivered the absolute final, most disgusting twist of this entire horrifying nightmare. "Julian, I have to tell you the complete truth because the heavy guilt is literally eating me alive," Sylvia whispered, her hands shaking slightly as she held her coffee mug. 2 full weeks before the massive wedding, your mother accidentally found a series of highly aggressive final notice collection letters in Preston's expensive jacket pocket while he was staying in the guest room. She confronted him privately. Preston completely broke down crying and confessed to her that he was drowning in massive, insurmountable debt. He admitted that the job at Harrington Equity was a total lie, and that he desperately needed Donovan's name on a joint bank account to secure a highly questionable bridge loan to stay out of federal prison. I sat completely frozen in the cheap vinyl diner booth. My analytical mind aggressively processed the horrifying, sickening information. "Are you absolutely telling me that my mother completely knew Preston was a broke, desperate fraud running from the law, and she still actively forced Donovan to marry him?" Sylvia nodded, thick tears finally spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. "Yes." Evelyn completely panicked. The massive deposits for the country club were completely non-refundable. The local newspaper had already printed the highly detailed wedding announcements in the society pages. She told Preston to keep his mouth completely shut, smile for the professional cameras, and they would quietly figure out the messy finances and the lawyer fees after the wedding was officially over. She was absolutely terrified of the public humiliation of canceling a luxury wedding. She purposefully led Donovan directly into a financial slaughterhouse just to protect her stupid country club image. I felt a massive, deeply chilling wave of pure revulsion wash completely over my entire body. My mother was not just toxically vain. She was genuinely, undeniably sociopathic. She was entirely willing to legally chain her favorite golden child to a dangerous federal criminal, risking his freedom and his future, rather than simply admit to the neighborhood that things were not absolutely perfect. That specific, horrifying revelation finally killed the very last, microscopic shred of lingering guilt I had buried deep inside me. Any tiny thought that maybe I had been far too harsh, or that maybe I should eventually consider forgiving them in a decade or two, completely evaporated into thin air. A week later, a long, rambling email from Donovan somehow managed to bypass my strict corporate spam filters. It was a deeply pathetic, highly emotional message. He aggressively apologized for being a terrible older brother. He admitted his massive, lifelong jealousy regarding my intelligence. He casually mentioned that he was currently in heavy court-mandated therapy and severely struggling to afford his basic rent now that our parents' retirement savings were completely drained by legal fees and lawsuits from angry investors. It was a highly manipulative, carefully crafted attempt to establish a new line of financial support from his newly wealthy brother. I read the entire email exactly once. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I simply hit the delete button, permanently blocked his email address, and permanently emptied the digital trash folder. I am telling you this incredibly long, painful story today from the beautiful wooden deck of a quiet beach house I recently purchased entirely in cash on the coast. I am currently looking out at the massive, peaceful ocean, listening to the calming sound of the crashing waves. The absolute most important lesson I have learned through this absolute hell is about the true definition of family. Society aggressively conditions us to believe that shared blood is a permanent, unbreakable contract. We are constantly told to forgive toxic abuse, to blindly accept blatant disrespect, and to continuously sacrifice our own mental health simply because family is everything. That is a highly dangerous, toxic lie. True family is not determined by random genetics or a shared last name. True family is fundamentally built on a solid foundation of mutual respect, genuine support, and absolute honesty. You are absolutely allowed to establish incredibly hard boundaries. You are entirely allowed to walk completely away from people who only value you for what they can aggressively extract from you, whether that is money, status, or a punching bag. You do absolutely not owe your hard-earned peace of mind to anyone who actively tries to destroy it. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line and walk away to protect yourself? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.